RetroDaze.
When we were young, the school week was long. And I don't mean adult work week long, no sir. We're talking waiting for Christmas Day long. We're talking our parents dragging us to the DMV long. It was the kind of infinite hellscape only a child could truly understand because time dilation was a daily experience at that age, and waiting for something good to start or something bad to end always felt like an eternity. So yes, waiting for Friday to arrive from the far end of forever is about the worst thing a kid can conceive of.
Luckily, we had a daily reprieve that came in the form of after-school television. Friday may still be days away, but a plate of snacks and a couple of our favorite shows would sure bring the weekend a little closer. Grab an Ecto Cooler and some bagel bites while we tune in to some after-school TV. I usually wait until the end of the episode to say this, but I feel an early disclaimer is warranted. There is absolutely no way we'll get to every notable after-school television show in this episode. I've done the math, and logic must prevail. But we were also not ready to commit to a top 10, most memorable, most underrated, or most forgotten list. Those are all way too subjective for our taste. Instead, what follows are merely some RetroDaze staff favorite after-school programs ranging the full scope of 70s, 80s, and 90s. And with that out of the way, walking through the door of your abode after a long day at school, you breathe a deep sigh of relief. Sure, there's homework to be done, but it's only 2:30 or 3 in the afternoon, and there's plenty of time for torture later. For now, you deserve a well-earned break with a snack and a few of your favorite TV shows. There are Doritos, combos, and Munchos in the cabinet, chicken nuggets, pizza rolls, and fish sticks in the freezer, yogurt, Polly-O string cheese, and Lunchables in the fridge. With so many options, you decide on a few Keebler Fudge Magic Middles cookies and nacho cheese Doritos with a Coke to wash it down. Not the most nutritious spread, but what would an after-school snack be without lots of sugar and salt? With your goodies laid out neatly on your ET TV tray, you head to the living room and click on the old boob tube for some good old-fashioned relaxation. Before we were old enough for the slightly more mature cartoons and sitcoms that aired after school, we were likely cutting our teeth on educational programming from the likes of PBS. No doubt these types of shows were more acceptable for parents who were worried we would rot our brains by watching too much television. Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Reading Rainbow, Bill Nye the Science Guy, and 3-2-1 Contact were chief among them, though sometimes the options felt endless. A squarely Gen X children's show that would fill our after-school hours was The Electric Company. The Emmy Award-winning program was an eclectic mix of sketch comedy and animation aimed at kids who had aged out of Sesame Street. While the focus was children's literacy, it didn't take away from the keenly entertaining series with a cast that introduced us to actors like Morgan Freeman and Bill Cosby, not to mention appearances by Mel Brooks, Joan Rivers, and voice acting from Gene Wilder. 3-2-1 Contact, produced by the Children's Television Workshop, was all about bringing science into the home, framed by the amusing and relatable interactions of 3 college students socializing in the workshop on their college campus during the first season. There were 3 different casts over the life of the show from 1980 until 1988, each with differing formats. Reading Rainbow began airing on PBS in 1983 as a way to address declining interest in reading books. When kids were out of school for the summer, they stopped reading completely and returned to school in the fall, worse for it. The idea was to use television to reach these kids by airing an educational program about reading over the summer. With the help of host LeVar Burton, the show ran for a whopping 26 years. Even though this one aired new episodes in the summer, like many other educational shows, reruns ran mornings, afternoons, and early evenings throughout the year. The newest of these educational type shows on our list is Bill Nye the Science Guy, having run from 1993 until 1999. Despite its science origins, the show, and Bill Nye himself, was embraced by young viewers and even talked about in schools the way we might have talked about MTV. Bill Nye the Science Guy shouldn't have been cool, but somehow it was. Perhaps due to the fascinating topics or Bill Nye's hyperactively humorous personality. Whatever the reason, it was nice to have an antidote if we overwatched Beavis and Butthead and needed an injection of intelligence.
Science!
As we got older, shows designed more specifically for entertainment purposes, and often to sell toys, took over our treasured after-school viewing schedule. In the 80s, that probably meant shows like He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, G.I. Joe, Thundercats, and The Real Ghostbusters. After the creation of a pitch Bible in 1982, which introduced many of the familiar characteristics of the series that were not present in the toy line, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe hit television screens in 1983. Although He-Man was the first cartoon used to promote toy sales, the cartoon did also have a clear moral lesson at the end of the episode, spelled out in no uncertain terms by one of the cartoon characters.
In today's story, Skeletor was looking for a shortcut, a quick way to riches and power. You may know some people like that, always looking for the quick way to get ahead of everybody else. Well, it doesn't work that way. The people who succeed are the ones who work for what they want. So don't be fooled by those who say they have a sure thing. There's always a catch to it. Don't sell yourself short. The right way is the best way.
Ah, sweet, delicious morals. The show ran until 1985 with only 2 seasons of 65 episodes each, though it lived on through syndication through 1988 when USA Network purchased the rights and continued airing reruns until 1990. Another of the famous toy-promoting cartoons you might have watched after school was G.I. Joe, a Real American Hero. The original series aired between 1983 and 1986, created by Ron Friedman. The cartoon actually started as a series of commercials made to advertise the comic books, which in turn advertised a toy line that later birthed an animated series which further promoted the toys. Whew! From the commercial came a 5-part miniseries in 1983, followed by another 5-part miniseries in 1984, which then finally became a full series in 1985 and 1986. To further complicate matters, after G.I. Joe the movie, Deke Entertainment won the license and produced another 2-season series from 1989 to 1992. Into the 1990s, the cartoon landscape began to shift, offering new series for discerning young after-school viewers. Of the most popular was the stellar lineup called The Disney Afternoon, which launched in 1990 and ran from 3 p.m. until 5 on Channel 11, well, at least on the East Coast. 2 of the shows that became part of the Disney Afternoon, DuckTales and Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers, actually predated the block, first airing in 1987 and 1989 respectively. The original block of shows consisted of The Adventures of the Gummy Bears, DuckTales, Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers, and Tailspin. As shows ended, the lineup would move up 1 slot and add a new show to the end of the block. Some of those additions included Darkwing Duck, Goof Troop, Bonkers, and Gargoyles. For children of a certain age, these cartoons were the be-all, end-all of after-school viewing, eating up an entire 2 hours of post-educational torture with animated delight. Further capitalizing on the broad popularity of the Disney Afternoon, many of these series went on to become video games as well. Interestingly, another uniquely 90 animation block, Fox Kids, was partly born out of a contractual dispute between Disney and Fox regarding the rights to air DuckTales in Los Angeles, which escalated into Barry Diller, Fox COO at the time, pulling the show from all Fox-owned stations. They launched Fox Children's Network, which was mostly a Saturday morning block, with only 30 minutes on weekday afternoons. But in 1991, when they rebranded as Fox Kids Network, they expanded the after-school viewing to 90 minutes and then to 3 hours in 1992. For anyone bored with the Disney-centric lineup, Fox Kids offered an alternative. For instance, their after-school block of shows in October of '94 included Bobby's World, Tiny Toon Adventures, Tasmania, and Animaniacs. And if you watched past 4 o'clock, you also got an episode of Power Rangers. As we continue to traverse the 1990s, an interesting thing happens to after-school programming in the latter part of the decade. Many of our favorite animation blocks disappear, and in their place, talk shows began their conquering of the airwaves. Sure, you'll still find an episode of the Power Rangers here and an airing of Boy Meets World there, but mostly you'll find a massive talk show quilt blanketing your favorite time slots. Jerry Springer, Oprah Winfrey, Montel Williams, Rosie O'Donnell, Jenny Jones, and Maury Povich, some more controversial than others, became mainstays. Perhaps these tabloid talk shows, called trash TV by some, arrived at the perfect moment in your life when you were entering high school and feeling too old for cartoons. They seemed to mimic the gossipy and often judgmental atmosphere you experienced at school, yet simultaneously felt exceedingly adult as they tackled previously taboo topics like sex, affairs, and drugs. These shows weren't for everyone, and yet it seemed like everyone was always talking about them. The sensationalist fights breaking out on Jerry Springer, the big DNA test reveals on Jenny Jones, it all seemed so important at the time. Then there were the rest of us who either abandoned after-school television altogether or retreated into the always comforting sitcom reruns. These weren't specifically a product of the 90s, of course. Going back, there always seemed to be old sitcom reruns airing through the day. They may have first premiered decades ago, but I must have viewed every single episode of I Love Lucy, The Beverly Hillbillies, and Leave It to Beaver in after-school reruns alone. They were always there and always comforting. If nothing else was on, you better believe an episode of The Addams Family or Laverne and Shirley was playing. And as the years went on, more and more of these old shows continued to air. All in the Family, Green Acres, The Jeffersons, I Dream of Jeannie, Three's Company, Happy Days, they all welcomed you with open arms.
One of the sad side effects of digital streaming is missing out on these classic reruns. When we were kids, the old shows, especially if they were in black and white, held no interest to us. If it wasn't for the limited channels and endless reruns, we may have never given the classics a chance. Now, there are so many view-on-demand options. Will kids of today ever choose to go back and watch entertainment from yesteryear? I'd like to think the answer is, at least sometimes, yes, especially if their parents are guiding the way. What are your thoughts on that particular subject? And if that's too heady a discussion for you, what after-school programs were your favorites to watch? Well, I'd love to hear about it down in the comments. And if you enjoy our content, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and maybe even activating that ubiquitous notification bell. It really does make a huge difference. Let's meet again next week to celebrate yesteryear, right here on RetroDaze.
Clicky clacky.